Realtors are quitting, a signal that the 2023 housing downturn is about to get even worse. With data from the National Association of Realtors showing that the growth rate in realtors has officially gone negative year over year, just like it did in 2007 right before the last big crash. And why are realtors quitting? Well, it's simple. Home prices are now on the decline in America. With the yellow line, the year over year growth in home prices now going into negative territory for the first time in over a decade. And historically, the relationship between home prices and realtor growth is very clear. The realtors follow the trends in the prices. And one state where these realtors are really quitting en masse is California, with data from the NAR showing a 3.5% decline in realtors in California year over year, the highest in America. And the reason realtors are quitting in California is because this is where home prices have gone down the most, with data from Redfin showing that prices are down 16% year over year in Oakland, 13% year over year in San Francisco, 10% in Anaheim, 10% in Sacramento, 9% in Oxnard, and 8% in LA. And when you combine those price declines, which are fairly big for just 12 months, with a massive collapse in home sales, the California Association of Realtors says sales in California are at nearly the lowest levels of all time, you get collapsing commissions for realtors. I mean, these figures are insane. In the Bay Area, the average realtor is earning 49% fewer commissions today compared to a year ago. In Los Angeles, realtors are earning 38% fewer commissions. And in other West Coast markets like Seattle, Phoenix, and Vegas, commissions are down 30 to 40% as well. And I'm gonna give you a crazy stat, everyone. Did you know that the average realtor in America only earns $58,000 per year in commissions based on current home prices and home sale activity? That $58,000 is one of the lowest levels for realtor commissions ever adjusted for inflation. Because $58,000 per realtor is well below the long-term average, and it's well below the good times we saw in 2021 during the pandemic when the average realtor was earning $95,000 in inflation-adjusted terms, or in 2003, 2004 when they were earning $100,000 in inflation-adjusted terms. We're gonna see probably the part-time ones drop off first, then we're going to see the lowest full-time earners drop off next, and in 3 to 4 years time we could see a 30% reduction in the number of realtors, which would bring the total number of realtors in America down from around 1.5 million closer to this 1 to 1.1 million level long term. Especially because we're now seeing another big problem surface in the housing market, and that's the fact that mortgage rates are now surging again. Last week I talked about how they were up to 6.8%. Well, now according to Mortgage News Daily, they're up to almost 7% on the 30-year fixed mortgage rate, which is a huge blow to the summer 2023 housing market because buyers were already struggling to afford payments and qualify for mortgages. Well, now it just got a whole lot harder because when you take these higher mortgage rates and combine them with today's home prices, you can see that the cost to buy for the average home buyer in America is nearly $2,700 a month, including mortgage, interest, taxes, insurance, and maintenance, which is at an all-time high level and way higher than the median cost to rent in America, which is $1,850. So long as we see the cost to buy so much higher than the cost to rent, we're not going to see any type of meaningful recovery in home buyer demand in America, which is a big problem for sellers in the housing market for the rest of 2023, because a lot of these sellers, they're being stubborn, they're not listing, and if they are listing, they're listing high. Well, they were doing that on the assumption that there'd be a recovery in home buyer demand and a turnaround and that mortgage rates would go back down, but no, mortgage rates aren't going back down. And many of these sellers who are listing way too high right now, they're going to be forced to cut the price because the dollars and cents in the housing market just don't make sense for the regular home buyer right now. A reality that's borne out by the already near record low levels of home buyer demand in America. I mean, folks, I want you to take a look at this graph because it's shocking to say the least. Mortgage applications to buy a house over the last 15 plus years. What do you notice? Well, in mid-May, before this big increase in mortgage rates, mortgage applications to buy a house were down 26% year over year. They were down by more than 50% from their peak in 2021, and they were basically at the lowest level in the last 2 decades. But folks, I gotta address a question I think a lot of you are already thinking about. You're saying, well, wait a minute, Nick. Why is it that when I still go to an open house in my neighborhood, I see bidding wars? It doesn't feel like the housing downturn's getting worse. It doesn't feel like realtors are quitting. It doesn't feel like we're at record low levels of buyer demand. Why is that? And that has everything to do with Inventory. Seller listings and for sale inventory is still restrained, partially due actually to higher mortgage rates, and that's creating the perception that this is still a buoyant housing market. With data from realtor.com showing that the 564,000 homes on the market today are roughly half of what the pre-pandemic level of inventory was, closer to 1.1 million. So we need another 500,000 homes to show up on the market before we're going to start to see substantial improvement in affordability. Now, how are we going to get another 500,000 homes? Well, folks, there's a lot of different ways we could get 500,000 houses. There's over 12 million homes that are owned and sitting vacant right now. If only 5% of those owners of vacant homes sold, we would have the inventory we need. Additionally, there's also 50 million mortgage holders in America. If only 1% of those mortgage holders were in default, foreclosed on, or forced to sell and didn't buy a new house, well, we would have the inventory we need. However, there needs to be selling pressure to get it. There needs to be a worsening in the economic situation and real liquidity needs that show up for homeowners before we see those homeowners feel compelled to sell into a down market. And that's when we're going to see the real substantial price declines. And I know a lot of you have been waiting for these price declines for a long time, and you're getting frustrated and waiting, but you got to understand that housing downturns take time to play out. For instance, the downturn in the late 2000s that everyone acts like was so obvious at the time wasn't obvious in 2007, right before it happened. A lot of people in 2007 said that the housing market is actually not going to crash. And a lot of realtors and investors said in 2007, when prices were down 1.4% year over year, 2% year over year, they said this is just a blip. It's no big deal. It'll recover. But no, folks, it didn't recover for another 5 years. Prices went down for 5 years in that last housing downturn, and realtors quit for 5 years as a result. What about in the early 90s? We could see prices started going negative in 1991 by about -2%. Then they bounced back into, let's just say, semi-positive territory and traded sideways for a couple years. So this downturn in the 90s wasn't really like a full-scale national crash. However, in super overvalued markets like Los Angeles, prices went down for a good 6 years in the early to mid 90s. And so we very likely have a long road ahead in terms of this housing downturn where sales activity remains low and prices go down by more over multiple years. And one thing that makes me confident in predicting this, everyone, is going back to that comparison of how much it costs to buy a house versus rent an apartment. So long as this cost to buy is way higher than the cost to rent, there will not be a major incentive for first-time home buyers to enter the housing market, and thus they'll remain renting. And this is especially true in certain cities and states, everyone, where the cost to buy is just way higher than the cost to rent, and quite simply, like, most renters just can't even qualify for a mortgage. For instance, take Dallas, Texas, for example. In Dallas, the cost to buy in terms of your mortgage, interest, taxes, and maintenance is $2,700 a month across the metro. That is more than 51% higher than the $1,800 a month cost to rent an apartment. So if you're a home buyer in Dallas right now, you're gonna have to pay $900 more per month to buy in today's market than to rent. Another market that's like this is Seattle, where the cost to buy is $4,400 a month. I mean, that's insane, everyone. I know I have some buyers in Seattle out there. You're having to put up a lot of money if you want to buy, whereas the typical cost to rent an apartment is $2,200 a month. So literally, you have to pay $2,000 more a month in Seattle to become a buyer. Similar situation in Denver, where the cost to buy is $3,500 a month. The cost to rent is $2,000 a month, meaning it's 76% more expensive to buy. And in a second, I'm going to show you some more cities and comparing that buy to rent cost, because that's so important for you as a home buyer to understand whether it's a good time to buy. And ultimately, this situation of the cost to buy being higher than the cost to rent, that's not going to sustain itself. Never in the history of the US housing market have we seen that type of situation last over the long run, because usually one of two things happens to resolve the situation. Number one, either the cost to buy goes down through lower mortgage rates and lower home prices, or the cost to rent goes up to meet the cost to buy. And so what's going to happen over the next 1 to 2 years, everyone? Are we going to see the cost to buy go down or the cost to rent go up? Well, let's look at the data. The May 2023 rent report from rent.com shows that asking rents in America have now declined to basically be flat year over year. So rents have stopped growing. In about half of America, rents are going down, particularly in metros like New Orleans, Austin, Phoenix, Vegas, Oklahoma City, Chicago, Birmingham, Sacramento, Memphis, and Seattle. These are the markets with the biggest year-over-year decline in asking rent. And rents are likely to decline by more into the future, everyone, because apartment developers in America are currently building over 1 million multifamily and apartment units. That's near a record high. Those units are going to get delivered onto the market over the next 1 to 2 years. So that suggests that rents are going to stay flat or maybe even go down more from here, which means the easiest solution to this huge disconnect between buying and renting is for the cost to buy to go down. And ultimately, we'll have to track the economy over the next 3, 6, 9 months to see how that plays out. But in the meantime, I would encourage you as a home buyer to look at that differential between the cost to buy and cost to rent in your market, particularly if you're in a city like Austin, where despite the recent declines in the market, the cost to buy of $3,500 a month is still double the cost to rent. And so we're not going to see a recovery in the Austin housing market for a long time. This orange line needs to come down closer to the blue line. Same thing in Salt Lake City. The cost to buy is $3,200 versus $1,700 a month to rent an apartment. That means you're paying $1,500 more a month to be a home buyer in Salt Lake. Similar situation in Boston, where the cost to buy is $4,000 a month compared to $2,900 a month to rent. That's an expensive rent, but it's still $1,100 cheaper than what you would pay as a home buyer in Boston. Similar situation in New York, where it's now about $4,000 a month to buy across the entire New York metro, which includes New York City, Long Island, Westchester, and Northern Jersey, compared to $3,100 a month to rent. Now take a look at this, everyone. Go back into history and see that actually it was more expensive to rent in New York from 2015 to 2020 than it was to buy, which actually induced people to buy since it was more expensive to rent. But now that it's more expensive to buy, I think we're going to see structurally lower home buyer demand going forward in New York. What about Nashville, everyone? Nashville was always an affordable market. Before the pandemic, it only cost $1,350 a month to buy a house in terms of mortgage, tax, and insurance. Now that's more than doubled to $2,700 a month. And yeah, the rent has gone up a bit, but not by nearly as much. And thus, it's way more affordable to stay a renter in Nashville than it is to buy. And if you want access to those graphs yourself, everyone, so you could look up your city in terms of buy versus rent cost, hit the join button below and become a channel member. Every week I provide exclusive graphs and data to my channel members to help them become more informed on their local housing market and make a better decision as a home buyer and investor. And actually, quite a few realtors are members on my YouTube channel because they want access to the data so they can communicate the data to their clients. And I honestly think that's the best chance a realtor has of surviving this downturn, is if they're honest and clear and data-driven with their clients going forward, because the realtors that are not going to survive are going to be the ones that I call the FOMO hype machine realtors. I'm sure you guys have all met these realtors before. You'll go to an open house and then immediately they'll be all over you, pressuring you to either buy or to become their client. And look, being a realtor is hard. Like any sales job, you really have to grind. However, a lot of realtors do themselves a huge disservice by coming off as pushy and untrustworthy. If I had a recommendation for the realtors that watch my channel, I would say be honest, be relaxed, and don't put pressure on the client. Rather, add value to the client so they come to you